Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Coal River by Ellen Marie Wiseman. Narrated by C.S.E. Cooney. Chapter 1. Coal River, 1912. On the last day in June, in the year when the rest of the world was reeling from the sinking of the Titanic, 19-year-old Emma Malloy was given two choices: get on the next train to Coal River, Pennsylvania, or be sent to a Brooklyn poorhouse. The doctor had released her from the Manhattan hospital. The Catholic Church had donated a small suitcase with a few items of clothing, along with a proper mourning dress, undergarments, a hand-brush, and a bar of soap. And her aunt and uncle had sent money for a ticket. After less than an hour to decide, she walked on shaky legs from the hospital to the station in what felt like a trance, said goodbye to the nurse, climbed the passenger car steps, and found her seat. The nurse had said Emma's escape from the deadly theater fire was a miracle, and she should be forever grateful for this second chance. The only thing Emma knew for sure was that she was an orphan now. It didn't matter what happened to her or where she went. Just like her late brother Albert, her mother and father would be with her everywhere. There was no escaping this wretched grief, this horrible, heavy pain in her chest. 2 days later, when the train exited the long tunnel beneath Ash Mountain and started across the timber trestle above Coal River, the tiny thorns of nerves prickled across Emma's skin. She had vowed never to return to the isolated mining town named after the black river that roiled through it. And yet here she was, barreling helplessly toward constant reminders of another day she'd give her life to forget. Outside the train windows, the full weight of summer's heat bore down on Pennsylvania's interior, making it feel as if the world and everything in it were roasting inside a giant wood stove. Trees drooped beneath the blazing sun, their withered leaves already scorched yellow around the edges. It hadn't rained in over a month. Still, the black river beneath the train trestle was deep and swift, boiling along its rocky banks like poisoned pottage. Upstream, the shoreline was wild with trees and brambles, fit for neither man nor beast. In the distance, jagged mountains sloped down toward the riverbed, their steep cliffs cutting off the only other exit out of the valley. Emma pictured the tiny vial of dark liquid in her drawstring purse, stolen from her hospital bedside when the nurse wasn't looking. She longed for the bitter taste of tranquility on her tongue, but only a few sips of the laudanum remained, and she didn't want to waste them. Lord knew she would need the medicine to get through the next few days. She dug her nails into the cloth armrest of her seat, counting the seconds until the passenger car was back on solid ground. Maybe everything has changed, she thought. Maybe this time Uncle Otis will be different. Or maybe I'm just nervous because the train is high on a trestle hundreds of feet in the air. She wanted to believe those things with all her heart, but she wasn't good at telling herself lies. When the train finally reached the other side of the river, she ran a finger inside the high collar of her mourning dress, the bombazine like gravel against her sweltering skin. In the roasting passenger car, the heavy sleeves and tight neckline felt like a straitjacket or a suit of armor, despite the fact that the garment was several sizes too big. Certainly some people still believed proper etiquette called for a grieving daughter to wear black for a full year. But why did mourning costumes have to be so stiff and restrictive, as if grief weren't cruel enough? How she longed for her sailor dress with a loose waist, or a pair of summer trousers. If it were up to her, she would have removed her corset and the cotton slip beneath her skirt and tossed them out the train window within the first few minutes of the trip. She would have rolled up her sleeves, unpinned her hat, and taken off her stockings. But remembering the unsettled glances of the other passengers when she'd unpinned her weeping veil from her hat and stuffed it inside her handbag, she resisted. Because Emma's childhood had been spent around people in show business, Actors dressed as Vikings and pirates, ghosts and beggars, nuns and Egyptians. She never understood why some people judged others by what they were wearing. In the theater, no one gave it a second thought when she handed out playbills or ran around the neighborhood in sporting pants, newsboy caps, or boys' shirts. Granted, wearing flat shoes and knickers on her petite frame made her look more like an adolescent boy than a young woman on the verge of adulthood, and wearing her waist-length nutmeg-colored hair in one long braid instead of rolled up in the latest styles made her look years younger. But bloomers and corsets made it hard to ride a bike through Central Park, and heels and skirts made it impossible to climb the theater catwalk to watch rehearsals. Her mother used to joke that she had 2 sons instead of 1, and her father said she looked like a life-sized porcelain doll, with tiny hands, a button nose, and Cupid's bow mouth. His little Lilliputian, he used to say. Her parents wouldn't have cared if she'd taken off the mourning dress and changed into her old clothes. Then she remembered that the dress she was wearing, along with the broadcloth skirt, the shawl-collared blouse, and the muslin nightgown in her tattered suitcase, were the only clothes she owned. All the rest, including her sailor dress and her favorite pair of knickers, were gone, burned to ashes in the fire. The fire. The words felt like a knife in her heart. Laughter and conversation faded in and out inside the passenger car, droning in her ears with the clack of iron wheels and the pounding of the locomotive. In a few minutes, when the train came to a stop, she would have to stand up and get out. That was it. There was no reason to think beyond that. Breathing was hard enough. Then the train braked and shuddered, turning a wide, slow curve as it approached the village station, and the valley opened up before her like a black-and-white sketch from a child's schoolbook. Surrounded by peaks stripped nearly bare of trees and foliage, the village of Coal River sat huddled on the edge of Bleak Mountain, a sprawling congregation of wooden houses, shops, stone buildings, and saloons. Slag roads and dirt footpaths led through and around the community, then traveled out through the canyons and valleys up into the miners' village and beyond, zigzagging across the earth like the dark legs of a giant spider. Near the base of the center peak, the 9-story coal breaker of the Bleak Mountain Mining Company loomed above a church steeple, perched above the town like an enormous creature hunched over the earth, its black nostrils spewing streams of dark smoke. The breaker looked like a hodgepodge of different-sized structures piled on top of one another, as if new buildings were added every year with no mind to how each new addition would fit with the others. Rows of multi-paned windows lined each story, and at the top was a curious little peak, like a miniature house added at the last minute. Leading up to the highest floor, a railroad trestle rose up from the ground, reminding Emma of the switchback railway ride on Coney Island, the one attraction she refused to step foot on because it was so high. Surrounding the breaker lay the rest of the colliery, smokestacks, a labyrinth of buildings and sheds, railroad tracks and pipes, roadways and steam engines. Piles of mine waste smoldered around the outskirts of the mining site, emitting a thick white smoke. At night, as a child, Emma used to imagine the red, blue, and orange glow coming from the burning calm banks where the fires of hell. Farther up the mountain to the right, dirt paths and rows of miners' houses lined a vast hollow. Emma had never been up to the miners' village, but she used to envy the children living there, away from the pomp and rigidity of Coal River's upper class. She imagined them running in the grass and climbing trees, staying outside until dusk, sipping lemonade on the porch in their bare feet. Aunt Ida would have scorched her ears if she had taken her shoes off outside, or climbed a tree and stained her dress. Her aunt expected Pinkies up at tea and made her walk with books on her head to improve her posture. Emma couldn't count the number of times she'd fantasized about running away with her brother and hiding in the miners' village until her parents came back from Manhattan. Maybe if she had, Albert would still be alive. A flash of red caught her eye to the left, and when she glanced that way, she felt another jolt of dread. Near the north end of town, a 3-story mansion stood on a hill surrounded by pine trees and manicured lawns, its red roof gleaming in the afternoon sun. It looked exactly the same, down to the marble fountain in the front yard. Her arms broke out in goose flesh. Then the train depot blotted the mansion from view. The train slowed, and the iron wheels caught and screeched, caught and screeched. The passengers stood and gathered their belongings, eager to exit after the long journey. Emma stayed in her seat and peered out the window at the station, a burning lump in her throat. The platform was crowded with people, men in waistcoats and straw hats, children in their summer whites, women in traveling dresses cooling themselves with paper fans. A group of policemen in peaked caps and knee-length military jackets stood on the left side of the station, Winchesters held to their chests, blocking a mob of scowling miners in shabby coats, newsboy caps, and worn derbies. Everyone looked miserable and hot. Emma considered staying on the train, continuing on to the next destination, or turning around and going back. But back where? Home? Her parents' tiny apartment above the theater was gone, destroyed in the fire along with everything in it. Besides, she didn't have another train ticket. The only thing in her handbag was the laudanum, an empty change purse, and her weeping veil. She bit down on her lip and scanned the waiting crowd for Uncle Otis. Then she saw him standing opposite the police, talking to a young man in a morning suit and top hat. Her uncle was tall and wiry, the skin on his face and hands pulled tight over his bones, like a side of beef left out to dry in the sun. Streaks of gray lined his horseshoe mustache and mutton chop sideburns. She thought how terribly old he looked, hard and ravaged by age and a love of whiskey. If nothing else, the train ride had given her time to come up with a plan, one that might help her escape Coal River. If she played her cards right, it might seem like a good idea to Uncle Otis, too. She hoped it would, anyway. No, she prayed it would, even though she'd stopped praying after Albert died. If her plan failed, she didn't know what she would do. She couldn't spend the rest of her life in this place. Outside on the platform, the man in the top hat nodded in response to Uncle Otis while searching the train windows, his narrow eyes scanning every car. His lanky, bow-legged frame looked familiar and strange at the same time, as if Emma had met him in another lifetime. Then she recognized the flat, pallid face, like a board with a nose and bulging eyes. It was her cousin Percy, all grown up. She groaned inside. Percy was still here. Percy, who used to follow her around like a puppy until she bloodied his lip and told him to leave her alone. Percy, who short-sheeted their beds and led them down to the river the day Albert drowned. Emma felt the blood drain from her face as a terrible image assaulted her mind. Her 8-year-old brother in his red cap and winter boots, his eyes wide when the ice gave way, his bare hands clawing the slippery surface for something to grab hold. She could hear his screams, his terrified voice yelling her name, and then he was gone, washed away by the swift cold current of Coal River. The look of horror and confusion in his eyes before he disappeared had burned itself into her memory, haunting every moment since. She blinked against her tears, struggling to push away the thought of him trapped below the ice, his dark curls stirred by the current, his eyes empty and sightless. It was almost more than she could bear. You were only 10. You warned him not to go out on the ice. And then, in the next instant, he was down by the river because of you. She touched the spot below her neck where her mother's silver locket had hung before it disappeared beneath the ice with Albert, and a sudden falling sensation swept over her. She grabbed the edge of her seat to stay upright. She had been prone to nervous spells since waking up in the hospital 4 days ago, but this particular bout swept over her with a savage wave that made her nauseous and dizzy. What was she doing, returning to Coal River? How could coming back to her aunt and uncle's house, where she and Albert had spent 4 miserable months while their parents looked for new jobs in Manhattan, possibly put right her ruined life? Then another thought came to her, a thought that made her stomach cramp. Maybe I'm being punished. The train shuddered one last time, jerked to a final stop, and let out a blast of steam, jolting the standing passengers back into their seats. Emma stood on shaking legs, ran her hands down the sides of her stiff dress, and picked up her suitcase. She waited until the last passenger had left the car, then lifted the heavy hem of her too long dress and headed toward the exit, her heart slogging in her chest. She felt like she was watching herself from someplace else, in a dream or on a moving picture screen. Then she stepped off the train and covered her mouth, the sulfuric, rotten egg odor of burning comb confirming the awful truth. She had returned to Coal River. After Albert died and her parents had taken her back home to Manhattan, she smelled the comb on her clothes for months, no matter how many times her mother washed them. For years, the stench of burning mine waste swirled through her nightmares, emanating from her pillowcase in the morning like a cloying phantom perfume. Then one day, it was gone, and she thought she'd never have to smell the wretched odor again. Now she tried not to gag, shaking her head when the baggage handler offered to take her suitcase. The other passengers milled about, carrying their luggage, waving and calling out to waiting friends and relatives. She stood on her tiptoes, trying to see over shoulders and backs, searching the crowd for Percy and Uncle Otis. 2 cars down, a group of men in worn jackets and work pants exited the train, their faces somber. The miners shouted at them to go back where they came from, and started throwing rocks and sticks in their direction. The police shoved the miners backward, yelling at them to simmer down. One of the miners broke through the line and started toward the train. 4 police aimed their rifles at the rest of the miners, while 3 others grabbed the escapee, pushed him to the ground, and wrestled his arms behind his back. Emma ducked and hurried toward the station, one hand on her hat, trying to remember where she saw her uncle. Suddenly, a strong hand closed over the handle of the suitcase, and she turned, ready for a struggle. Percy smiled and pried the luggage from her grip. He tipped his top hat in her direction. His eyelashes were so light they were nearly invisible, and his hair was such a bright shade of blonde it looked white. "Hello, Emma," he said. "I'm sorry you've returned to Coal River under such sad circumstances, but it's so good to see you." She nodded once. "Percy," she said. Just then, a miner in a tattered coat broke through the police line and headed toward Uncle Otis, his face contorted with rage. A policeman caught him, wrapped an arm around his neck, and dragged him backward across the train platform. A second policeman hurried over to help, handcuffing the man's wrists behind his back. "What in the world is going on?" Emma said. "Everyone is restless these days," Percy said. "It's the heat." "But why are the miners throwing rocks at those men?" He glanced over his shoulder, as if noticing the disturbance for the first time. "Those men are new immigrants," he said. "The miners think they're here to take their jobs." He extended his elbow, asking permission to escort her through the crowd. "Shall we?" She lifted the hem of her skirt and reluctantly took his arm. "I suppose." "You look exactly the same," he said. "That is, I mean to say, you look wonderful." She gave him a thin smile and searched the faces of those around her to avoid his probing eyes. No doubt he was surprised she was still so small in stature, despite the fact that 9 years had passed since her last visit. She wondered how long it would be before he made fun of her for being so short. He ushered her through the crowd, using her suitcase to nudge people out of the way. Near the ticket window, Uncle Otis was talking with a policeman, his face red, his brow furrowed. "Take down the names of anyone who gives you trouble," he said. "Yes, Mr. Shawcross," the policeman said. "Father," Percy said, "look who's arrived." Uncle Otis smiled and opened his arms. "Welcome back, Emma," he said. "I'm sorry about your parents, but it's a pleasure to see you." "Hello, Uncle," she said. She clenched her jaw and turned her cheek to let him hug her. "My God, woman," he hissed in her ear. "Where is your mourning veil? Have you no decency?" She drew away and gripped the edge of her handbag, twisting the drawstring between her fingers. "I removed my veil on the ride here," she said. "It was too cumbersome to wear the entire trip." "Well, now that you've arrived," Uncle Otis said, forcing a smile, "You must put it back on before riding through town." She shrugged. "I'm afraid that's impossible," she said. "The train was unearthly hot, and when I opened a window the veil was sucked right out." Uncle Otis frowned. "I don't have time for this right now," he said. "I've got my hands full with these miners. Take her up to the house, Percy, then come back for me. Tell your mother to get her settled in." "Yes, sir," Percy said. Uncle Otis started to move away, then stopped and turned to face Percy again. "Take the side roads," he said under his breath. Behind him, a group of miners broke through the police line and rushed across the platform, shouting obscenities at the incoming immigrants. The police charged forward and pulled them back a second time. Uncle Otis stormed toward the commotion, arms flailing. A shot rang out, and Percy grabbed Emma's arm, urging her through a door and across the station. On the other side of the train depot, the dirt road was filled with horses, buggies, pedestrians, wagons, and bicycles. A yellow tin Lizzie sat at the edge of a plank sidewalk, its high white wheels stained gray, its gold head-lanterns and low windshield coated with a fine black powder. Like everything else, the surrounding buildings, the windows, the sidewalks, the store canopies, the telephone poles, the ground. The car was shrouded with coal dust. Percy opened the passenger door and helped Emma climb into the vehicle. She wrestled the black sea of her skirt into the car and settled it around her feet, then sat in the front seat and looked around. A few yards away, on the opposite side of the thoroughfare, a young boy in an oversized cap and frayed jacket sat slumped against a telephone pole covered with sooty flyers, his empty stare locked on the passing people in horse-drawn wagons. His face was puffy and pale, his sunken eyes the color of silver. His hair was dark and thick, like Albert's, and his left leg was withered and encased in a metal brace. His tattered boots and the ends of his crutches hung over the edge of the sidewalk, sticking out into the road. Behind him, two older boys sat smoking cigarettes on a wooden box, their backs to the street. A policeman marched across the road and kicked the end of the boy's crutches, shouting and pointing at him to move back. The boy struggled to stand while the policeman waited for him to obey. Emma started to climb out of the car to go over and help, but before she could get out, the older boys pulled him to his feet and the three of them wandered away. Percy lifted her suitcase into the back seat, then climbed into the driver's side and started the engine. He took off his top hat, stretched a pair of goggles over his eyes, and put on a driving cap. "Ready?" She nodded, one fist over the knot in her stomach. Percy pulled the vehicle away from the sidewalk and steered it along the busy road, swerving around wheel ruts, honking at slow horses and wayward children. On the plank sidewalks, women stopped to watch them pass, whispering behind gloved hands. Policemen patrolled every other block, strolling the sidewalks and streets with rifles strapped to their shoulders. A few raised hands in greeting. Others walked with their heads down, spitting tobacco juice on the ground or smoking cigarettes. Emma didn't recall the streets being filled with police the last time she was here. She thought about asking Percy why there were so many, but the engine was loud and she didn't feel like talking. As they drove through town, she was dismayed by how little things had changed. She felt like she'd gone backward in time, and everything and everyone was still here, frozen, and waiting for her return. The two-story company store looked exactly the same, with brick chimneys, peeling red clapboards, and black shutters. A gathering of old codgers still sat in rocking chairs and stools on the slanted porch, whittling or playing checkers on overturned barrels. The burned wood sign to the garbage dump was still nailed to the mule barn, and potholes still filled the narrow road leading past the village green. Up ahead on the sidewalk, an old woman with white braids doddered toward them, hunched over as if she were about to pick something off the ground. Beside her, a young boy thumped along on wooden crutches, one empty trouser leg tied shut. Emma stiffened. The boy could have been Albert's twin. He had the same thick shock of black hair, the same sprinkling of brown freckles across his nose, the same buck teeth. As Percy drove past, she turned in her seat, unable to tear her eyes from the walking apparition. The boy stared back at her with solemn eyes, his head turning on his neck. Then he stopped and scowled as if he recognized her. The icy fingers of fear clutched Emma's throat. Was it all just a horrible nightmare? Had Albert been alive all this time, trapped in Coal River, and waiting for her to come back and rescue him? But why hadn't he aged? And what happened to his leg? Then the boy turned and kept going, seemingly unfazed by the encounter. Emma faced forward, a hollow draft of grief passing through her chest. The falling sensation returned with such force that she had to resist the urge to grab Percy's arm to keep from swooning. No, she thought, Albert is dead. I saw his frozen body after it was pulled from an ice jam beneath the train trestle. I saw his small coffin lowered into the ground in Freedom Hill Cemetery on that bright winter day. I felt the bone-chilling wind shriek down from Bleak Mountain. I watched my mother sob in my father's arms. It can't be him. She took a deep breath and held it, trying not to panic. Was this how it was going to be? Was every little boy in Coal River going to remind her of Albert? Were they all injured or maimed? Or was she finally, once and for all, losing her mind? Maybe she should have taken her chances in the Brooklyn poorhouse after all. Chapter 2. Percy's Model T sputtered up the steep grade of Flint Hill, and the trees fell away on both sides of the road. On the right, Emma could look down on the center of town. On the left, the Flint mansion overlooked all of Coal River. Perched high on a manicured lawn, the Italian-style manor was massive and rambling. With low roofs and wide eaves, a multi-level porch surrounding the two bottom stories, and cast-iron railings painted white to match the ornamental trim. At the house's highest peak, an oversized octagon cupola sat above the red tile roof like a miniature lighthouse. A chill passed through Emma. She shivered, staring up at the mansion and wondering if a house could put a curse on people. The scandal and death connected with the mansion occurred several years before her birth, but it had instantly become a tragic tale that would be ceremonially passed down from generation to generation. The story of Hazard Flint and his wife Vivian was the closest thing Coal River had to a local legend. Vivian, the sole heir to the Bleak Mountain Mining Company, had married Hazard Flint in an arranged marriage when she was barely 16. 2 months later, her parents died in a train wreck on their way to Chicago, and Hazard took over everything. According to the mansion help, he was mean-tempered and crass, controlling his pretty young wife along with the mining company. After their son Levi was born, Vivian insisted on separate bedrooms. 5 years later, when she gave birth to a second boy, everyone wondered if Hazard had changed his ways, or if Vivian was having an affair. Then the nursemaid and the stable hand kidnapped the 6-day-old infant and left a note in his cradle, demanding $10,000 for his safe return. As instructed, Hazard left the ransom money in the alley behind the blacksmith shop, but the newborn was never seen again. Rumor had it that Hazard was the one who found Vivian, hanging from the rafters in the cupola in the summer of 1889. On the cedar floor beneath her feet was a suicide note, and a tear-stained letter saying she couldn't go on without her baby. From then on, the youth of Coal River had tortured themselves with stories of a female ghost standing at the cupola windows, waiting for her son to come home. Over the years, many a local boy had been thrown off the property for climbing the trellis outside the nursery window, trying to look inside the baby's room, which was said to be untouched since the day he'd disappeared. Emma could still picture the dark paneled hallways, the Persian carpets and oversized furniture, the hand-painted portraits lining the walls. She could still smell the old wood and plaster, like sawdust and cold oatmeal in her mouth. Why hadn't she found another way out all those years ago? Maybe if she'd snuck out a side window or porch door, Albert would still be alive. She thought back to that winter, when Percy and his friends dared Albert to break into the mansion. They had been teasing him for weeks, making fun of his city clothes, and calling him Sissy Boy because of his thick curly hair. Then, one day, on her way home from buying potatoes at the company store.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?